She blocked our driveway, live-streamed it like a hero, and tried to bankrupt 3 generations of work. What she didn't know, my grandpa used to bury bureaucrats for breakfast. That's how this started: a clipboard, a white SUV, and a woman named Karen, who mistook paperwork for power and underestimated what legacy looks like out here in Wyoming. We've been on this land for over 100 years, the Colburn family ranch. 62 acres of wind-cut fields, rolling pastures, and a creek that runs cleaner than half the town's tap water. My name's Nate Colburn. I'm 34. Run a precision welding shop out of a steel-framed barn about 200 yards behind the main house. We specialize in aviation components, mostly brackets, mounts, and parts that need tolerances tighter than a fly's eyelash. It's quiet work, careful, exacting, and not the kind of thing you expect to start a war. But war found us anyway. The first warning shot came on a Tuesday morning, early March, cold, clear sky. I was walking out to the shop, coffee steaming in my hand, when I saw it, a brand new white Honda CR-V parked dead center in our front drive, completely blocking the gate, like it had been measured and placed with military precision. License plate from the next county over. No note. No apology. Before I could even open my mouth, the driver door popped open, and she stepped out. Late 40s, shoulder-length hair that probably cost more than our hay budget. Sharp little blazer, clipboard, phone, sunglasses too big for her face, and an attitude to match. She looked around like she was doing an appraisal. Then, without so much as a glance at me, she started taking pictures: mailbox, fence, gate, the shop in the background. I walked up, slow and calm, like Grandpa Walter taught me. "Ma'am," I said, "you're on private property." No reaction. I stepped a little closer. "You're also blocking our only driveway. Mind moving your vehicle?" She paused, lowered her sunglasses, and gave me a look like she'd just stepped in something unpleasant. "I'm conducting a community inspection," she said, that voice confident, over-rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror. I raised an eyebrow. "We're not part of any community association." That got her attention. She turned to face me fully, pen ready, clipboard poised like she was about to write me a ticket. "Name Nate Colburn. This is Colburn Ranch." She smiled. But it wasn't friendly. "Well, Mr. Colburn, we'll see about that." This entire area falls under the aesthetic influence zone of Willow Glen Estates. What the hell is an aesthetic influence zone? It means that what happens here affects the property values of our neighborhood. She gestured toward the workshop like it was a landfill. "We're trying to maintain professional standards. I'll be following up." And just like that, she got back in her SUV and drove off. Didn't even wait for me to respond. I walked back up to the porch where Grandpa Walter sat in his usual rocking chair, flannel shirt, old dog at his feet, spitting tobacco into a faded Folgers can. Didn't say a word, just sipped his sweet tea and watched her taillights disappear down the county road. "That one's got vinegar in her veins," he said. I told him what she said. About the aesthetic zone, the pictures, the clipboard. He didn't look surprised. "You know," he said, "they tried something like this back in '78. Only back then, they brought lawyers instead of lady sheriffs. Grandpa Walter is 83, fought in Korea, spent 40 years as a civil surveyor, knows more about this land's legal structure than most of the people in the courthouse. He's also the one who taught me how to weld, how to hold a torch steady even when your hands are shaking, and how to keep calm when people try to push you off your own dirt." That night, I figured she was just a local busybody, the kind of HOA Karen who thinks she owns every blade of grass within 5 miles of her mailbox. I was wrong. Because 3 days later, that white SUV came back. This time, she parked in the exact same spot and brought upgrades. Now she had a laminated HOA official business placard on the dash, a camera mounted to the windshield, and a damn folding tripod set up in the gravel like she was filming a documentary about neighborhood decline. And again, no knock, no warning, no permission, just her, walking the perimeter, snapping photos, writing notes, and muttering to herself like we were some unsightly fungus growing on the edge of civilization. I stepped off the porch and headed her way. "Ma'am," I said it last time, this is private property. And I said I'm documenting code violations that affect our community. She said, without looking up, we're not in your community. This land has never been part of Willow Glen Estates. That's exactly the problem, she said, smiling like a fox who smelled feathers. Properties like yours are hurting resale value. I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm. That's when Grandpa Walter stood up. He hadn't gotten out of that chair in 2 hours, but now he was walking across the gravel with a glass of tea in one hand and something sharp behind his eyes. "Mornin', miss," he said. "Care for a drink?" She blinked, caught off guard, hesitated, but Karen took the tea and sat. For the next 20 minutes, I watched my grandfather dismantle her defenses one polite question at a time. Where she was from, how long she'd lived in Willow Glen, whether she had family nearby. By the time she finished that glass, we knew everything: the divorce, the debt, the struggle to sell her house, and the desperate attempt to force up property values by cleaning up the messy edges of the development. She never said it outright, but she didn't need to. Because when people like Karen come poking around rural land with legal pads and pretty cars, they're not looking for community. They're looking for control. And this time, she picked the wrong family. By the time Karen returned the second week, it wasn't a visit, it was an operation. The SUV was back, parked perfectly perpendicular across our drive like some kind of territorial flag. But this time, she didn't come alone. She brought back up a professional-grade DSLR camera with a telephoto lens, a voice recorder clipped to her lapel, and a clipboard now housed in a leather portfolio that probably had more legal tabs than a courthouse. She stepped out wearing aviator sunglasses, an HOA windbreaker, and the kind of smugness you usually only see from tax auditors or airport TSA agents having a power trip. Karen was no longer just concerned. She was on a mission. From the porch, I watched her move with precision, photographing every angle of the gate, zooming in on our Colburn fabrication sign, recording ambient noise levels, yes, really, and taking notes like she was preparing for a court deposition. I waited until she got within 10 feet of the shop entrance before stepping forward. "Back again," I said. "You applying for a job?" She didn't smile. "Mr. Colburn, you are currently in violation of multiple community standards, including, but not limited to, operating industrial equipment in a residential influence zone. We've had a commercial permit here since 1991. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to document." She lifted her camera and snapped a photo of the welding tank stacked against the shop wall. I moved closer, not aggressive, just enough to remind her she was on someone else's dirt. "You're trespassing. I'm on the public easement." "Lady, that ain't public. That's a private ranch road that predates your entire development." She turned slightly and smiled like a chess player who thought she was 2 moves ahead. "Then you won't mind if I confirm that with the county, will you?" That night, I poured myself a double shot of rye and sat at the kitchen table across from Grandpa Walter. He was thumbing through a dusty folder labeled Willow Glen, pre-dev maps. Inside were faded blueprints, copies of easement deeds, and surveyor field notes older than I was. "She's gathering ammo," I said. "Let her." Walter replied without looking up. "Sometimes the best way to win a fight is let the other fella swing first." And miss, 2 days later, Karen went nuclear. She launched a Facebook group called Willow Glen Standards Watch, complete with a cover photo of a sunset in serif font that made it feel like a PTA committee. The content, however, was pure propaganda. Photo after photo of our ranch, our shop, our trucks, all with captions like, "Industrial blight at the edge of our neighborhood. Are your kids safe near unregulated welders? Time to take back our property values." She even clipped screenshots of aerial views and accused us of operating outside municipal tolerance boundaries. What the hell is a tolerance boundary? We didn't know either. Still don't. The comments were a dumpster fire. Some neighbors applauded her leadership. Others called it harassment. One guy from Lot 12 wrote, "I moved out here for peace, not to get caught in a cold war with farmers." But the worst came when she started tagging my business clients. Real names, real companies, public posts saying things like, Did you know this supplier operates without regular EPA monitoring? Or curious that XYZ Aviation still does business with Colburn Fabrication, given what the county might soon uncover? The implications were subtle enough to avoid legal trouble, but sharp enough to sting. And they did. That Friday, I lost my first client. A machine shop down in Laramie called to reschedule indefinitely. Then came the emails phrased politely, but all saying the same thing. Too much noise, too much attention, too risky. That's when I snapped. I stormed out to the porch, slammed the screen door, and waved my phone at Walter. She's killing us. One post at a time. He didn't flinch, just leaned back in his chair, sipped his tea, and said, "Boy, what did I tell you about fighting with fire? I don't want fire. I want her out of my life." He chuckled that low, gravelly sound that always meant he was 10 moves ahead. She doesn't want you gone. She wants your land to fit her postcard. That's the difference. So, what do? Walter tapped his temple. We think, and we build pressure the way welders build seams, steady, clean, and ready to hold under heat. That weekend, while Karen continued her little HOA crusade online, we got to work offline. Walter called up a buddy at the assessor's office. I dusted off every permit, inspection, and compliance doc I had in the file cabinet. We double-checked every easement, every access point, every zoning code, and then we installed a fence, 8 feet tall, steel posts, slate gray paint, right along the edge of our property line facing Willow Glen. No logo, no warning signs. Just a small, official-looking plaque that read, "Private Utility Access Zone, Authorized Use Only." By Monday morning, Karen was back standing outside the fence, phone in hand, eyes twitching like someone who smelled smoke but couldn't find the fire. She didn't say a word, just took pictures. Then that afternoon, I got 3 phone calls from Willow Glen board members I'd never even met. One of them, a guy named Tim, asked point blank, "Are you putting up a structure?" I smiled into the phone. "Not unless your president makes me." The morning after we put up the fence, Karen posted a panoramic shot of it with the caption, "Wall of Shame industrial fencing erected near Willow Glen." What are they hiding? The post had over 70 comments in 2 hours. Some were neighbors cheering her on. Others weren't so kind. It's a fence. Karen, not Area 51. If they were really breaking the law, why hasn't the county stepped in? I'd rather live next to welders than next to you. It was the first crack in her armor, a tiny one, but real. And Walter noticed. "Son," he said, setting down his mug, "she's overexposing herself. Too loud. Too soon. She still has people convinced we're running some rogue chemical factory." He smiled. "And that's exactly what we want." Over the next few days, Karen doubled down. She posted daily updates to her group pictures of our driveway, blurry shots of me grinding metal, long captions about unregulated pollutants and devalued family homes. Then came the big one, a 90-second video where she stood in front of our fence holding a binder, practically shaking with performative concern. We have a responsibility as homeowners to uphold standards, to demand oversight, to say not here, not next to our children, our homes, our dreams. It would have been funny if it weren't aimed at destroying my livelihood. That night, Walter sat me down with a yellow legal pad. "All right, time to give her something to worry about. You want me to fight back?" "No," he said. "I want you to look like you're preparing to." We started with the basics. We filed an environmental noise audit voluntary through a third-party firm, contacted a land use consultant to review long-term development plans, posted a job listing for a part-time operations coordinator, and submitted a permit application for a modular utility structure. We weren't building anything, but we let the paperwork suggest we might. Then came the next move: visibility. I hired a guy to install additional fencing on the west side, clean, professional, and just official-looking enough to make people nervous. Slate gray again. 8 feet high. Same discreet plaque. Private utility management area. Authorized access. Only. No barbed wire. No threat. But it looked like something run by people who know how to file lawsuits. The effect was immediate. By Thursday, I got a text from Tim, one of the Willow Glen board members. "Hey, Nate. Off the record, are you guys starting a commercial expansion?" I replied, "Not unless someone forces us to." Meanwhile, Karen's tone began to shift. Her daily posts became more frantic, her grammar more erratic. She started responding to every comment that questioned her, typing in all caps and referencing obscure HOA bylaws like she was writing her own legal thriller. She even posted a link to a PDF titled "A Vision for Willow Glen, Reclaiming Our Community's Edges Inside Maps, Arrows, Property Lines Marked with Red X's." She was trying to push a motion through the HOA board to annex our land under a protective aesthetics overlay. The document was full of words like neighborhood harmony, cohesive frontage, and mandatory exterior compliance. Walter skimmed it, then snorted. "She's trying to make ranches illegal. Is that even possible, son? Anything's possible with enough clueless board members and an unused rubber stamp." But she'd made a tactical error because that PDF, so carefully designed, leaked to the rest of the community. And for once, Karen wasn't the only one being scrutinized. People started asking questions like, "Wait, this plan includes a sidewalk through Colburn Ranch. Who pays for the fencing she wants removed? How is annexing a working ranch going to improve anything except Karen's ego?" And the whispers began. That weekend, I was out by the shop when a dusty minivan pulled into our drive. Out stepped Helen Rollins, a longtime Willow Glen resident who once sued the HOA over mailbox colors and won. She handed me a folder. This fell off the back of Karen's printer. Thought you should see it. Inside, meeting minutes showing Karen had tried to quietly initiate a targeted compliance campaign against the ranch. A list of properties marked non-conforming, and a draft letter she never sent, but saved. It read, "While the Colburns may have historical roots in the area, their refusal to engage with our neighborhood values makes them a liability to community growth." That was the moment I stopped playing defense. "Walter," I said that evening, "let's push back. With what a better story." So we launched a campaign of our own, but not on Facebook. We printed real flyers, simple, black and white sheets titled "Know Your Neighbors, The Truth About Colburn Ranch Inside, Our Business License and Safety Record," letters from clients, photos of Walter's survey maps and water maintenance logs, a letter from our vet certifying livestock welfare compliance. We didn't attack Karen. We didn't mention the HOA. We just showed people who we were and what we weren't. We slipped them under doors, taped them to mailboxes, dropped them off at the co-op, the firehouse, even the high school. By Monday morning, we got nods from 3 different Willow Glen homeowners as we picked up supplies in town. And Karen. She posted a 12-minute rant accusing us of waging psychological warfare through paper. "I will not be intimidated by propaganda," she wrote. "This isn't Russia, it's real estate." That night, Walter leaned back in his chair, watching the sun dip behind the ridge. "She's unraveling. Should we push harder?" He smiled. "No, son. We're gonna let her spin herself dizzy. And then, when she's good and tangled, we'll pull the string." The morning after we put up the fence, Karen posted a panoramic shot of it with the caption, "Wall of Shame. Industrial fencing erected near Willow Glen. What are they hiding?" The post had over 70 comments in 2 hours. Some were neighbors cheering her on. Others weren't so kind. "It's a fence. Karen, not Area 51. If they were really breaking the law, why hasn't the county stepped in? I'd rather live next to welders than next to you." It was the first crack in her armor, a tiny one but real, and Walter noticed. "Son," he said, setting down his mug, "she's overexposing herself. Too loud, too soon. She still has people convinced we're running some rogue chemical factory." He smiled. "And that's exactly what we want." Over the next few days, Karen doubled down. She posted daily updates to her group pictures of our driveway, blurry shots of me grinding metal, long captions about unregulated pollutants and devalued family homes. Then came the big one, a 90-second video where she stood in front of our fence holding a binder, practically shaking with performative concern. We have a responsibility as homeowners to uphold standards, to demand oversight, to say not here, not next to our children, our homes, our dreams. It would have been funny if it weren't aimed at destroying my livelihood. That night, Walter sat me down with a yellow legal pad. All right, time to give her something to worry about. You want me to fight back? No, he said. I want you to look like you're preparing to. We started with the basics. We filed an environmental noise audit voluntary through a third-party firm, contacted a land use consultant to review long-term development plans, posted a job listing for a part-time operations coordinator, and submitted a permit application for a modular utility structure. We weren't building anything, but we let the paperwork suggest we might. Then came the next move: visibility. I hired a guy to install additional fencing on the west side, clean, professional, and just official-looking enough to make people nervous. Slate gray again. 8 feet high. Same discreet plaque. Private utility management area. Authorized access only. No barbed wire. No threat. But it looked like something run by people who know how to file lawsuits. The effect was immediate. By Thursday, I got a text from Tim, one of the Willow Glen board members. Hey, Nate. Off the record, are you guys starting a commercial expansion? I replied. Not unless someone forces us to. Meanwhile, Karen's tone began to shift. Her daily posts became more frantic, her grammar more erratic. She started responding to every comment that questioned her, typing in all caps and referencing obscure HOA bylaws like she was writing her own legal thriller. She even posted a link to a PDF titled A Vision for Willow Glen, Reclaiming Our Community's Edges Inside Maps. Arrows. Property lines marked with red X's. She was trying to push a motion through the HOA board to annex our land under a protective aesthetics overlay. The document was full of words like neighborhood harmony, cohesive frontage, and mandatory exterior compliance. Walter skimmed it, then snorted. She's trying to make ranches illegal. Is that even possible, son? Anything's possible with enough clueless board members and an unused rubber stamp. But she'd made a tactical error, because that PDF so carefully designed leaked to the rest of the community. And for once, Karen wasn't the only one being scrutinized. People started asking questions like, wait, this plan includes a sidewalk through Colburn Ranch. Who pays for the fencing she wants removed? How is annexing a working ranch going to improve anything except Karen's ego? And the whispers began. That weekend, I was out by the shop when a dusty minivan pulled into our drive. Out stepped Helen Rollins, a longtime Willow Glen resident who once sued the HOA over mailbox colors and won. She handed me a folder. This fell off the back of Karen's printer. Thought you should see it. Inside, meeting minutes showing Karen had tried to quietly initiate a targeted compliance campaign against the ranch, a list of properties marked non-conforming, and a draft letter she never sent but saved. It read, while the Colburns may have historical roots in the area, their refusal to engage with our neighborhood values makes them a liability to community growth. That was the moment I stopped playing defense. Walter, I said that evening, let's push back with what a better story. So, we launched a campaign of our own, but not on Facebook. We printed real flyers, simple, black and white sheets titled Know Your Neighbors, The Truth About Colburn Ranch Inside, Our Business License and Safety Record. Letters from clients, photos of Walter's survey maps and water maintenance logs. A letter from our vet certifying livestock welfare compliance. We didn't attack Karen. We didn't mention the HOA. We just showed people who we were and what we weren't. We slipped them under doors, taped them to mailboxes, dropped them off at the co-op, the firehouse, even the high school. By Monday morning, we got nods from 3 different Willow Glen homeowners as we picked up supplies in town. And Karen. She posted a 12-minute rant accusing us of waging psychological warfare through paper. I will not be intimidated by propaganda. She wrote, "This isn't Russia. It's real estate." That night, Walter leaned back in his chair, watching the sun dip behind the ridge. She's unraveling. Should we push harder? He smiled. No, son, we're gonna let her spin herself dizzy. And then, when she's good and tangled, we'll pull the string. It started with a knock. Nothing unusual about that except it was 8:03 a.m. on a Tuesday. And nobody knocks out here unless they're lost. or bringing trouble. I opened the door to find a man in khakis, a clipboard almost as big as he was, and the nervous smile of someone who knows he's about to ruin your morning. Mr. Colburn Nate Colburn. That's me. I'm Derek, Building and Zoning Enforcement. Got a complaint on file regarding potential unpermitted commercial activity in a residential buffer zone. He said it like he'd memorized it during the drive over. Mind if I take a look at your facility? I led him to the workshop. Derek moved like a man walking into a hornet's nest with a peanut allergy. Polite, apologetic, but thorough as hell. He examined the welding bays, measured distances between equipment, checked ventilation, signage, even the fire extinguisher dates. Gotta admit, he muttered halfway through, "This is one of the cleanest shops I've ever seen." "Appreciate it," I said. "We don't cut corners, I can tell." "Most illegal operations don't have their OSHA logs framed." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He stayed for nearly 3 hours, documenting every inch like it was a crime scene. At the end, he found exactly one issue. The spray booth permit needed to be updated to align with a newer EPA guideline from last year. Cost me $450 and half a day to file it. No fines, no violations, but still a paper trail, and a timestamp. Walter called it the opening volley. 2 days later, the health department showed up, woman in her 50s, glasses on a chain, clipboard in one hand and water test kit in the other. "Routine inspection following a community concern," she said. I led her to the well house. She tested our groundwater, checked chemical storage logs, reviewed disposal procedures, the whole playbook. We passed, clean as rain. Still, she left us with a reminder notice about updating our monthly documentation logs, something no one had ever required in 20 years. More paperwork, more lost time, more pressure. Friday brought the fire marshal. Now, this one was different. It was Bill Garner, a guy Walter had worked with in the 90s back when Bill was still wearing turnout gear, and Walter was pushing for safer barn codes after a string of rural fires. Bill didn't even bother pretending. "Got a call, said you were storing explosive gas improperly, acetylene tanks." "Yep. Want me to fake a scowl for the photos?" We both laughed. Still, he walked through the workshop, checked the tanks, reviewed the storage log, and nodded approvingly. "Better maintained than the fire station's own supply," he said. Still, he flagged one minor issue: the signage near the tank corral needed to meet updated ANSI font standards. Each visit followed the same pattern. 1. Arrive with a complaint. 2. Confirm everything's legal. 3. Find a technicality. 4. Issue a minor warning. 5. Leave a paper trail. It was death by 1,000 citations. And Karen. She was loving it. Every inspection was another excuse for her to post, "Officials investigate ongoing safety issues at Colburn Ranch." Concerned for the future of Willow Glen, but what she didn't realize was that Walter had seen this before. Every morning, while I was in the shop, Walter would sit on the porch, same chair, same thermos, same dog curled up nearby. Looked like he was napping, but the moment an inspector showed up, he'd snap awake and stroll over like a man checking on the barbecue. To Derek, the building inspector, he said, "That workshop permitted in 1991 under Grandfather Clause 32C, County File 2C4B, want the original scan to the Health Department tech. That well's been tested every year since '03. Last nitrate test came back cleaner than city water. I've got the whole archive. To the fire marshal, tank certifications are every 5 years. Ours were done last April. I keep the DIOT log in triplicate. Each time, the inspector would blink, caught off guard by the 83-year-old man casually quoting codes better than they could. One of them even asked, 'Were you in permitting or something?' Walter just smiled. 'Son, I wrote the permitting guidelines you're using.' We started calling it the front porch defense. A lawn chair, a thermos, and a walking encyclopedia of rural compliance law. After the third inspection in 5 days, I finally broke. 'Walter, how long do we play this game?' He looked at me, eyes steady. 'As long as it takes her to run out of bullets. Feels like she's got a whole damn armory.' He nodded. 'Let her shoot. Paper's cheap, but truth sticks. Then came the turning point, late Saturday afternoon. Walter walked into the shop holding a manila envelope. Inside photos, screenshots, copies of public comments. He'd been monitoring Karen's Facebook group, quietly watching, collecting. You remember that flyer she posted with the EPA claim? Yeah, she named 3 of your clients. He pulled out 3 emails, all forwarded by business contacts, all containing unsolicited warnings from someone identifying themselves as a concerned community leader. It was Karen, and she wasn't just harassing us anymore. She was reaching out to clients planting legal doubts, citing violations, questioning safety standards, which meant tortious interference. A real legal charge, one we could build a case around. You ready to flip this? Walter asked. What do you mean? He tapped the envelope. We don't just defend anymore. We document. We escalate. We bury her in her own strategy. That night, I sent out a letter to every client we'd lost, attaching our inspection reports and a certified statement from the county health office confirming we were in compliance. We also filed a formal complaint with the HOA registry board for misconduct by Karen, including client tampering and defamation. Karen might have thought she was untouchable because of her clipboard, but Walter, he had something better. Receipts. They say real war is fought in silence. Turns out, they're right, because when Karen realized inspections weren't enough to shut us down, she didn't come back with a tow truck or a lawyer. She came back with emails, and whispers, and uncertainty. It started subtly. Riverside Aero Parts. Our biggest aviation client out of Cheyenne had been with us for 6 years. We made high-tolerance brackets for their engine retrofit kits. One morning, I called to confirm the next delivery. Their project manager, Tom, sounded off. Hey, Nate, can we maybe pause the next round? Everything all right? Yeah, it's just legal's been going over some environmental concerns tied to your facility. What concerns? We got a letter, nothing official, just suggestions we do our due diligence. He sounded embarrassed, which made me nervous. 2 days later, Metro Metals. My steel supplier delayed an order for the first time in 4 years. New policy, they claimed, rechecking zoning compliance for rural accounts. Then came calls from 2 small clients canceling pending jobs. Same excuse, the budget reassessment. Same language pending questions about location compliance. It wasn't coincidence. It was coordination. On Friday, my inbox pinged with a forward from an old friend at Southwest Aviation. Thought you should see what's going around? He wrote, attached was an email polished, polite, passive-aggressive poison. Subject neighborhood concerns. Colburn Fabrication from Karen H., President, Willow Glen HOA. 2 dozens of business addresses. Dear partners, as part of our commitment to ensuring safe, sustainable neighborhoods, I wanted to share ongoing regulatory concerns regarding a facility operating adjacent to Willow Glen Estates. Colburn Fabrication has recently been subject to multiple inspections regarding potential zoning, fire safety, and environmental issues. While we do not yet have conclusive findings, we encourage all responsible partners to carefully consider compliance liabilities when choosing suppliers. Respectfully, Karen H., President, Willow Glen Homeowners Association. It was masterfully written, just vague enough to be legal, just alarming enough to tank my credibility. And it worked. Within a week, revenue dropped 38%. By the second week, I had to cancel a materials order to avoid overdrafting. I hadn't missed a payroll in my life, but now I wasn't sure I could cover the next month. Saturday evening, I came home later than usual, found Walter sitting on the porch, hat low, a glass of rye in one hand and an envelope in the other. He handed it to me. Inside a printed copy of the HOA email blast, we confirmed it came from her IP address. He said, "She's not just annoying anymore," I muttered. "She's trying to end us." Walter nodded slowly. "Then I guess it's time we end her plan first." I thought he meant file a lawsuit, but Walter wasn't thinking courtrooms. He was thinking land records. The next morning, he pulled out a box labeled Colburn Easements 1920s, 1970s, and spread survey maps across the kitchen table. We've been reactive long enough, he said. Now we play our own game. With what? We've got nothing to leverage. He smiled that quiet, dangerous smile I'd seen before. We've got water. What Karen didn't know, what most people didn't know, was that the creek running through Colburn Ranch didn't just happen to be there. It was the primary feed line for a buried water system that Willow Glen Estates tapped into for all non-potable irrigation. And the rights to that system, they belong to us. My father filed a perpetual easement in 1922. Walter said, it gives this land senior water access and control of any downstream easement flows. Can we enforce that? With the right paperwork, the right signatures, and the right deputy? Absolutely. Over the next 72 hours, Walter became a man on a mission. He called the county recorder, water district legal, and an old Army buddy who worked in federal land use enforcement. He verified that our water access logs had been updated. He filed an intent to review on our easement, and he made damn sure every document was notarized, time-stamped, and ready to weaponize legally. Meanwhile, I got to work writing letters to every client Karen had contacted. Attached. Our clean inspection reports, letters of character from neighboring ranchers, and, most importantly, a cease and desist notice addressed to Karen H., citing economic interference and business defamation. One of our smaller clients, the first to cancel, called the next day. We had no idea she wasn't official. She's official enough to cause trouble. I replied, well, count us back in. And if you're going after her legally, we'll provide a witness statement. That night, Walter handed me a folder labeled Contingency Plan. Inside was a document titled Notice of Temporary Access Restriction, Downstream Non-Residential Water Use. It was a formal declaration of temporary shutoff rights under the 1922 easement agreement. If we filed it and proved interference, we could legally block Willow Glen's irrigation line until compliance was resolved. Son, he said, I don't like using water as a weapon, but she declared war. Now she can feel what it's like to be on the thirsty side. The next day, I watched Karen's live stream. She sat in her SUV, sipping a matcha smoothie and reading HOA bylaws to her phone like she was reciting scripture. Sometimes we must sacrifice comfort for order, she said. I will not be intimidated. I will not back down. She was smiling, but for the first time, it didn't reach her eyes. That evening, Walter sat beside me on the porch. The wind was low. The creek ran steady. He clinked his glass against mine. She thinks we're bluffing. Are we? He leaned back. Ask her irrigation line tomorrow morning at 6:12 a.m. sharp on a Monday. I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee, hoping for a quiet start to the week. Instead, I saw Karen's white CRV parked directly across our main gate, not near it, not close. Dead center nose facing the fence. Wheels turned slightly like she was staking a claim. She'd parked diagonally to block not just the main drive, but also the equipment road we use for steel deliveries. And she came prepared. There was a folding chair set up next to the SUV, a tablet stand, 2 thermoses, and a sign duct taped to her windshield that read, Community Oversight in Progress. Do not disturb. I choked on my coffee. Walter, she's nesting. He came to the door, squinted into the early light. Thought she'd crack by now. Guess we'll just have to push. I marched out, boots crunching on gravel. Karen looked up from her tablet, where she was live streaming to her HOA audience of doom and chaos. Morning, Mr. Colburn. Just enjoying the sunshine. You're blocking our legal access road. She gestured to the laminated map she'd duct taped to the side of her SUV. I'm parked on what appears to be a disputed public easement. Until that's resolved, I'm within my rights. We've got survey maps that say otherwise. Then I guess you'll have to take it to court. She said it sweet as syrup, then turned back to her audience. Day 1 of holding the line. Sometimes leadership means being uncomfortable. I stormed back to the house, nearly ready to grab the sledgehammer. Walter intercepted me halfway down the path. Put the hammer down. She's asking for it? Exactly. And we're not giving her what she wants. He took the tool, leaned in close. Give me one more day. That's all I need. There was something behind his eyes. Not desperation. Certainty. Like he knew how the story ended. I called the sheriff's department. Deputy Reynolds came out by 9:00. Young guy, still smelled like academy. He listened politely, took notes, and asked Karen to move. She gave him the laminated property map and a whole rehearsed speech about easement ambiguity and civic oversight responsibilities. He scratched his head. Sounds like a civil matter. It's a blockade, I snapped. And I sympathize, he replied. But until a judge rules on it, I can't force her to move. Karen smiled the whole time, like a cat being told the canary's not quite dead yet. By noon, I'd missed a delivery. By 3:00, I lost a $15,000 order from an aviation client who couldn't wait any longer. And by 5:00, Karen was still sitting there now under a pop-up canopy, sipping sparkling water and live streaming community oversight, day one recap. That night, Walter disappeared into the basement with 2 briefcases and an armload of rolled maps. I heard him on the phone, speaking in clipped, calm tones. At one point, he said, "Yes, I'm invoking Article 14 of the 1922 Waterway Agreement. No, I'm not bluffing. I've got original copies with county seals." Tuesday morning, Karen escalated. She added an umbrella, solar charger, Bluetooth speaker, and a cooler. She was building a compound. And now, she was playing music, loud, some kind of a smooth jazz that sounded like the soundtrack to a bad HOA documentary. Walter didn't say a word that morning, just nodded, stepped back into the house, and reappeared wearing a press-collared shirt and jeans that hadn't seen daylight in 10 years. "Where are you going?" I asked. "To end this? By 8:00 of Emmer." A county truck pulled up just outside the ranch. Out stepped Jim Matheson, county surveyor and Walter's longtime friend. Karen tried to block him. "This is a private matter." Jim held up a folder and pointed to the badge clipped to his vest. "Actually, it's a federally filed easement assessment, and you're in violation. That can't be right, ma'am. This land has had a recorded water access easement since June 14, 1922. You are currently obstructing that access." He unrolled a full-scale map, then pointed to the exact spot where Karen had parked. "You're parked on a protected corridor." Karen went pale, then red, then back to pale. I was told it was ambiguous. Nothing ambiguous about a federal seal. "Ma'am." Walter stepped forward, slow and steady like always. "Jim, you mind if I make the call?" Jim nodded. Walter pulled out his flip phone and dialed. "Yeah, it's Walter Colburn. Time to clear the easement." 15 minutes later, a tow truck bigger than a dump truck rolled onto our land like a slow-moving dinosaur. Karen tried everything, waving the laminated map, calling the HOA hotline, threatening to sue the county, filming the driver, sitting in the driver's seat. It didn't matter. Deputy Reynolds came back, now fully briefed by county counsel. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "you can either exit the vehicle or be removed." Karen stood, frozen, and for the first time, speechless. She stepped out. The driver grinned. "Where you want it, Mr. Colburn?" Walter pointed toward the creek that ran behind the fence line. "Right there, shallow end." 30 minutes later, Karen's pristine white SUV sat knee-deep in creek water, gently leaning against the bank like it had stopped to think about its life choices. The tow truck rumbled off. Karen stood on the bank, holding her clipboard like it was a teddy bear in a thunderstorm. "This isn't over," she said quietly. Walter tipped his hat. "Ma'am, it was over when you parked on federal water. That evening, we sat on the porch, sipping rye and watching the sun bounce off the chrome trim of her stranded car. The comments online were nuclear. Even HOA board members started messaging me with, 'We didn't know she was doing all that, and we're holding an emergency meeting.' Walter looked over at me and grinned. She wanted a war. She forgot we'd been in a few. By sunrise the next day, Karen's SUV was half sunk in creek water, the community oversight sign now drooping sadly from her fogged-up windshield. Walter stood by the fence with his coffee, nodding like a man admiring a well-executed weld. "Ain't nothing poetic about revenge," he said, "unless the law writes the ending. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, we filed it. Notice of formal easement enforcement under the Colburn Willow Water Access Agreement, 1922, Signed by Walter. Countersigned by the County Water Commissioner. Stamped by the Federal Land Office. What did it mean? Simple. Every inch of Willow Glen's irrigation system ran through Colburn land. That system was protected under perpetual use terms. With one condition: any interference with water access nullified the neighborhood's automatic use rights. In plain English, Karen's blockade didn't just violate a boundary. It forfeited every drop of water Willow Glen used for its parks, gardens, and beautification zones. And yes, Walter had made sure to alert every homeowner in the neighborhood. They each received a certified letter with the subject line, "Immediate irrigation access suspension. Violation of federal easement law." It was written in calm, formal language, but the effect a nuclear bomb inside a flower bed. By noon, the HOA inbox was flooded. Karen's group chat leaked screenshots of residents panicking. "What do you mean my lawn guy can't water anything? I have tomatoes out back. Can I sue her? Why are we just learning about this now?" One homeowner, bless his heart, posted a drone shot of Karen's SUV in the creek with the caption Karen said she was protecting the neighborhood. "Now, my hydrangeas are dead." And while they melted down online, Walter and I were in the basement war room going through the rest of the playbook. He pulled out a document so old it looked like it belonged in a museum, property access and flow rights clause extensions. 1954, amendment turns out. Our easement rights didn't stop at water. They also covered soil runoff, creek maintenance, and overhead access rights. Overhead, I asked? Yep. Technically, anything over 20 feet above creek level is subject to Colburn land usage approval. I blinked. Walter, are you saying we could, technically, charge them for the air above the easement? He didn't answer. He just grinned. We didn't use that clause. Yet. But we let it leak quietly in HOA circles. That same day, Karen was voted out of her presidency in an emergency board meeting, 47-3. Helen from Lot, Fort Tenon. The woman who once sued the HOA for trying to ban wind chimes was elected interim president. She called us that night. "Mr. Colburn, we'd like to make this right." Walter chuckled. "Then stay out of our driveway and keep your bylaws off our land." But Karen, she wasn't done. 2 days later, we got word she was trying to sell her house. Only problem: no buyers. Too much HOA drama. And now, a pending water usage dispute listed on the disclosure form. Her own actions had made her property toxic on the market. Then came the final blow. Walter walked into the kitchen one morning holding a manila envelope and a fresh newspaper. Remember how she emailed your clients hard to forget? Well, we finally got confirmation from 3 of them. They're willing to testify. Inside the envelope, sworn affidavits, screenshots, forwarded messages with headers tracing back to Karen's HOA email. Enough to build a case for intentional economic sabotage. Walter called our lawyer an old rancher named Gil, who wore bolo ties and kept legal pads like other men keep trophies. Gil laughed when he read the documents. She tried to smear a precision welding shop with federal inspections and no violations. Yep. And she used HOA title to contact clients. You bet? Oh, she's toast. We didn't sue for millions. We didn't need to. We sued for exact damages, loss of business, legal expenses, emotional stress, and property access disruption. Total, 8,250. Gil handed her lawyer the settlement offer and said, if she declines, we go to court and bring every HOA resident as a witness. They signed the next day. By the weekend, Karen's SUV was finally towed out of the creek, not by us, by her. She paid the fee, quietly, no live stream, and when she came to collect it, she never made eye contact with Walter, just stood by the creek in rubber boots, trying not to cry while the winch dragged her vehicle free from the mud like some biblical punishment. That evening, Walter sat on the porch with a mason jar of iced tea and a copy of the signed settlement in his lap. You know what your great-granddaddy said back in 1922 when the first neighbor tried to cut through our creek? What he smiled? You mess with the water. You mess with the roots. And when the roots are deep, the tree don't fall. The morning after Karen's SUV was pulled from the creek, the sky was wide open and clean. One of those Wyoming sunrises that feels like a second chance. Walter stood out near the fence line, staring at the ground where her tires had carved twin ruts into the wet earth. "She left a mark," I said, stepping beside him. "Good," he replied. "Now let's plant something better." 3 days later, we hosted an open gate gathering. Not a press conference, not revenge, just a Sunday afternoon barbecue brisket, cornbread, beer on ice. We sent flyers to every Willow Glen home, Colburn Ranch open house neighbors. Welcome, respect is the only fee. To our surprise, more than 40 people showed up. They brought their kids, their questions, and, maybe most surprising of all, their apologies. Megan and Joel from Lot 9 were the first to speak. "We didn't know what was really going on. Karen made it sound like you were building a junkyard." Walter nodded. "That's how tyranny works. Starts with noise, ends in silence unless someone speaks." Over chili and beer, we gave tours of the shop, showed the inspection logs, walked folks out to the creek, even let a couple of curious teenagers weld practice beads on scrap plate. That evening, I stood near the porch and looked out at a dozen HOA residents laughing with my grandfather over ribs and war stories. Karen had tried to isolate us, but the truth she'd made us visible, and truth shines, even through mud. The following week, something even more unexpected happened. Helen, the new interim HOA president, called a full membership meeting and offered us something we never thought we'd hear. We want to draft a cooperation charter. No enforcement, no annexation, just voluntary coordination on shared land issues. Walter leaned over and whispered, "Took a war to get them to knock politely." We agreed, but under one condition, a permanent declaration of non-jurisdiction. No future board, vote, or special measure could ever touch Colburn Ranch. We wrote it in plain English, posted it online, had every board member sign it in person. Walter filed it at the county clerk's office the same day, stamped, sealed, untouchable. Meanwhile, Karen, she was nowhere to be seen. Her house sat dark, mailbox stuffed, HOA login credentials revoked. Rumor was, she'd fled to her sisters in Oregon, citing stress, legal harassment, and ungrateful neighbors. No one really mourned her exit. But Walter. He shook his head. People like her don't disappear. They just rebrand. You think she'll come back? No. But somewhere. There's another clipboard waiting for a Karen with a fresh name tag. 2 weeks later, we received an official letter from the county. They were closing their investigation, not just that they were reclassifying Colburn Ranch as a historical independent holding, thanks to our multi-generational records and Walter's original easement preservation. We now had permanent protection from future annexation attempts, zoning changes, or HOA expansions. It was done, completely, legally, permanently. And then came the final surprise. Helen approached us with a proposal to create a shared-use community trail between the edge of Willow Glen and the Colburn Creek, not for politics, not for property value, but for education. They wanted us to run it, offer weekend tours, teach welding basics, host history walks about ranch life and federal land rights. Walter's response. He laughed for a full 10 seconds, wiped his eyes, then said, "Sure, but I'm naming the welcome sign." 2 weeks later, it was installed, "Welcome to Colburn Trail," established in spite of HOA. Nonsense, respect the land, and the land will respect you. We've had 100 visitors since, some come to hike, some to weld, some just to hear Walter talk about how paperwork saved a century of legacy. And every now and then, one will ask about Karen. I just smile. She thought she could bend the law. Walter reminded her the law may take its time, but like water, it always finds its level. Final reflections. People think stories like this are about revenge. They're not. They're about boundaries, about people who confuse rules with righteousness, and about families who understand that history matters, especially when it's written in ink, not emotion. Walter didn't win because he yelled louder. He won because he documented. He waited, and when it mattered, he struck exactly where it counted. That's not petty, that's wise. And me, I learned more in 3 months of Karen drama than I did in 5 years running this shop. Don't assume silence is weakness. Don't let fear rewrite your family's story. And never, ever underestimate an 83-year-old with a filing cabinet full of land law. If you made it all the way through this saga, you're not just a listener, you're part of the resistance. What's the wildest HOA overreach you've ever heard of? And hey, if you want more true-ish tales of clipboard warfare, subscribe to HOA Karen Files. Because the next HOA horror, it's just a bylaw away.